know your audience. It's always good advice. Who are you writing for? Are you writing this anthology? That anthology was supposed to be read by people in Hollywood. Anthology is called Final Cuts, Stories of Horror Film from Hollywood. So it was actually published as part of Bloomhouse, the studio that made Get Out. And so Ellen said, Americans are going to be reading this anthology, but if you have so much Pakistani nuances, maybe they'll miss some of that. And I said, so what? I don't care. Let them miss. Let them go. Don't we Google American things? Let Americans Google Pakistan for a change. So we sort of reached this balance. Historically, I have tried to make my work accessible to American audience, yes, but when it comes to really writing a story, I try to write a story from a place that is uniquely Pakistani. I try to write about my stories have Rooh Afza, my stories have Bachon Ki Duniya, my stories have Anak Wala Jinn, and I want these references there. So when you read my stories, you might read Ray Bradbury, you might read Stephen King, but you may never relate to them because you've never seen those areas, those small towns in Lahore or Punjab or Karachi or Sindh. So why should we not be represented? So that is the balance that I've always sought. I just moved to Lahore last year, and I've already noticed that some of my stories have shifted. I recently wrote a story called hashtag Spring Love, hashtag Pichel Perry. And the story is set in Lahore. It's about a Pichel Perry who goes to Aurat March, the Pichel Perry goes to Nigat Chaudhary, she goes to, all these Pakistani, it's all Pakistani stories and incidents. And so the story is coming up, going to be at tor.com in actually 4 days on March 2nd. And I would probably not have written that story in America because I was just removed from my Pakistani heritage at that time. I hope that helps answer the question. Zan, are you still there or did we lose you along the way? Hello? Abdul Ghaffar, I think we might have lost Zan along the way.
Uh, yes, it's actually I'm in contact with him. He's
It,
just
it's
joining.
it's okay. It's okay. You guys are no problem. Don't worry about it. So I'm not gonna waste people's time. So I'm happy to answer questions or I'm happy to talk about stories. I do short fiction a lot. That is my first love. I think it used to be long form. Oh, there we have Zan is right there.
The dreaded internet drop just came my way. Big apologies for that. Yeah,
No worries.
we can pick up from where we left off. If you are, if you something to add on. Do you want to pick up from where you left off, or should I move
I
on?
think we can go on to the next question because
Okay.
I
Okay.
sort
Okay.
of yeah,
Understandable. Okay.
sure.
So you've been talking a lot about knowing the audience, and then there's this intricate balance that initially one really can't really put a finger to it between like knowing the audience and then catering to the audience. But like at the same time, from this, there's this. I heard you back in LLF a few days ago, and then a few weeks ago, and then there was this question asked about the way you label this as fables and like the whole question of fables being. I really want you, first of all, I'd really want you to delve a little into that for the audience. Like I find that could be a really good vantage point for the audience to understand this a little further, and also about speculative fiction in itself. Like Pakistani audience, I feel like if you're catering to the audience, or if you're not really even catering to the audience, like speculative fiction, I find that, especially in context of fables, like I find that that is really a better in invitation to a Pakistani audience, considering we have been introduced to it in some form or another, not exactly in one form, but like through folk tales and like Urdu literature that I read growing up. So like uh, I would really want you to delve into how, first of all, why fable, and if so, fable, like why speculative and not sci-fi or horror and sci-fi, and like how you transcend these rigid labels and turn it like into a sort of work that appeals to Pakistani audience in a way that it really invites the reader.
So, my I have been thinking a lot in the last couple of weeks because so many people have asked me this question, and it always comes down to you always wonder what kind of an artist or writer you are or who you want to be. So, I'll give you a quick. So, I actually because we have a bunch of, I'm sure, a bunch of aspiring writers and academics here. So, the way publishing works globally is a writer writes or a poet writes whatever, fiction, non-fiction, whatever, right? So then you have two options. You've either finished a short story or a poem or a sonnet or whatever, or you've published or you've written, I'm sorry, finished a long form work like a novella or a novel. So the next step is you go ahead and you find an agent in America, and then the agent pitches the work, the collection or the novel to a mainstream publisher. Then the acquiring editor gets the book and then it gets published. The beauty about short fiction in globally is you don't need an agent. All you need to know is you whatever kind of writer you want to be, you decide, you say this is the kind of person I see myself becoming. So I was a big Stephen King fan when I was a kid. I loved Stephen King and Clive Barker. I never liked Dean Koontz. I always thought Dean, he was too cliched, never liked him. I read three books, and after that every book I read was the same, so I wasn't a big fan. So, but Clive Barker loved him. I loved. This is before. This is after I switched to English as my predominant language. Before that, I grew up reading Chanchanglu, Umru Yar. We said Umru Yar. It's actually Amar Yar, but we said Umru Yar, Amir Hamza, बच्चों की दुनिया, बच्चों का बाग, नौनिहाल, जुगनू, आंख मचोली, तालीम तरबियत. Never liked तालीम तरबियत. I thought it was too moralistic. I always liked the fantasy stories much better and the horror stories. My favorites were the horror numbers of Bachon Ki Duniya and Aankh Macholi. Those were my favorites. I would wait an entire month to, get all that pocket money and go buy that special digest of the issue. So I read all of these stories as a kid. So I've been gravitating towards that kind of fiction since I was a child. And so when I was growing up, people were like, यार तुम क्या पढ़ रहे हो? What is this? This is ये तो बच्चों की कहानी है. इनका क्या फायदा इनको? Little did they know that it would actually make my career later on. So if the next time your grown-ups tell you "ये तुम क्या कर रहे हो," just ignore them. Okay, that you're probably doing yourself and them a favor. So ignore people who tell you, ignore the naysayers. They're not doing you any favors. So you do what you want to do, while at the same time being realistic about it. Not saying everyone should just go into the jungle and just start writing novels and imagine you're going to be Stephen King in 5 years. That's not going to happen. But I mean, it might, but unlikely. So I make sure you have a baseline career, and then you can do whatever you want to do at nighttime, which is when I write. So the question you really asked was about fables, and I was trying to answer. It is about the kind of writer you want to be. It's the label you want to adopt or give to yourself. It's the kind of literature you're in love with. Whatever you're in love with, it doesn't matter what the genre is. That's the literature you'll probably end up producing anyways, because you want to play with it. So if you read Stephen King, you probably want to write stories like Stephen King. You start art by imitating. We all start art or the craft part of it by imitating. And via imitation, sometimes even if you don't know the rules, even if you don't have a teacher, you still end up becoming quite good because you've been imitating for such a. There's a famous. I remember I was driving in Florida and I this radio show came on. I think it was NPR, and this gentleman, the host, he said, quoting that famous Chinese poet, and then he said something that caught my ears because that was my field. He said, read 1,000 poets, and you will sound like 1,000 poets. Read 10,000 poets, and you will sound like yourself. it is something worth pondering, and I've pondered about it for the longest time. You want to read everything. You're not a student of any particular specialty. You practice a particular specialty, but you don't just stick with one thing because that's where you absorb the world. You have five or maybe six senses. Absorb them all, you observe them all, and then you produce what you've absorbed over the years. There's a great book by Ray Bradbury, called Zen on the Art of Writing. Memorize it. I read it when I was 19 years old. I'm reading it again. Started it 2 days ago because someone mentioned Bradbury and wanted to revisit the book. And I discovered even more than I did when I was 19. It's sitting by my pillow, and I'm reading 3 or 4 pages every night before I go to bed because Bradbury makes me feel alive. I'm the kind of writer who's in love with life. There are nihilists. I have a lot of friends who are nihilists. They're like, oh, whatever. But I also write horror. So did Bradbury. You can be in love with life and still write about the darkest things because the darkest things are part of life too. So, so genre labels aside, fables, because our fables, Pakistani, historical, South Asian, subcontinental, these literatures, these histories, these fables are what gave us life. It made us who we are. We are children of dystopia, as I've said a couple of times. Pakistan has been a dystopian country for many, many years, decades now. So, why should we not use our own material? And I used fables especially because it connects me with this rich history and current of literature that is dominant in my part of the world for more than 1,000 years. I don't need to go elsewhere to find my stories. All my stories are right here. Hence the term fables. I'll give you a quick example. People talk about inspiration, when it comes to storytelling. My dad was visiting me in the US 6 years ago, and he mentioned Teddy Gully. How many people here have heard of Teddy Gully? Raise your hands. Has anyone heard of Teddy Gully in Old Lahore? उर्दू में मुहावरा है ना, पतली गली से निकल जाना. There is a reason for that muhavara because Teddy Gully is an actual superbly narrow street. It's an alley in Old Lahore. It's close to Mohalla Kakke Zai, if I'm not mistaken. So my dad told me about this gully, and he told me about a story. He told me a story about Teddy Gully, that once upon a time in the British times, these kids prodded a cow and forced it into the Teddy Gully. But Teddy Gully is so narrow that the cow got stuck. So now the owners of the cow wanted to get the cow out of the gully. So they put a rope around the cow and they tried to drag it out. And it was so tight that it flayed the cow in different areas. The poor beast was howling when they finally got it out. I heard that and I knew I wanted to write a story about it. So I wrote a story about it, and it became the first story, the leading story, the first story in my collection, Midnight Always. And that story was originally published in the British journal Black Static.
Uh, so building on that, there's this consistent theme that I've been observing in what you've been saying, and that is about how deeply connected the personal is to the stories, essentially, and how personal expression then later on can turn into stories that can appeal to a vast variety of audiences, basically. So there I had this question, and I think that it would fit in here a little, and that it would be appropriate to ask it now. And that is like, I find that personal at times is also biased and political. And in all of your stories, mostly all of your stories, particularly there's one, the vaporization in Thalpi of a peculiar Pakistani family. I love it. I read it like when it first came out on tour. And like I was interested to see that how there was tinges of political in pretty much every story that you write. Not even like personal political, even in like geopolitical sense. Like that is a very major part of all the stories that you write. Like there are terrorist attacks, there's a story about a marginalized Karachi boy, as the blur puts it. There are Taliban that appear for a bit as well. But at the same time, one particular thing that I wanted to emphasize on was that I don't find that these themes take away from the story itself by clouding it in some form of political or identity tokenization. Like it's unfortunate, but I read it. But whenever like I read, most of the time there appear these sort of works that are so clouded and so integrated in political concepts that really takes away from the story itself. So it's very interesting how you balance speculative fiction and like really surreal themes, and then you are able to add such concepts to it as well. There's one story that is dedicated to, if I'm not mistaken, to the APS, the tragedy that happens. Like it also delves into that. So I'd really want your thoughts on how this process works for you, and if it does even in the first place, but like how does that work?
Um, you know, um, the question there is, you see, it's difficult for me to answer most questions in a straight fashion because I'm a storyteller. So I try to answer my questions in form of stories. Um, when we talk about art and the artist, even anytime we talk about politics, there's always a question of art and the artist. How much of the artist is in the art and whether you can separate the two. I don't think it's possible. I think the idea that the art and the artist can be separated is almost it's just it's I think it's a useless question. It's a futile question. There is no way an artist is going to be ever separated from their art. So when you're reading a problematic writer like Rudyard Kipling, who was an imperialist, if as a reader you don't want to read Kipling because Kipling thought we were all brown dogs, you absolutely have the right not to read Kipling. However, if you're going to read Kipling, not from that context, but from a different context, let's say Kipling, you come to Kipling because Kipling's art itself and his skill is matchless, then it's a different context. You're coming to Kipling to steal from him. If white people can steal 300 years of wealth from India, why are we not allowed to steal some of their tools from their arsenal? We should. We should go read Kipling and steal from his tools and then subvert his stories. A lot of people of POC writers or people of writers of color have been doing that with H.P. Lovecraft, a very problematic writer. Lovecraft was very anti-Semite, racist writer, and people like Victor Lavallee, people like Silvia Moreno Garcia, who's Latina, and myself. I've actually written one Lovecraftian story, which is in this collection, maybe actually two. The other one, I don't think it's a Lovecraftian story, but some people say it's a Lovecraftian story. So you can subvert these themes. But one thing that I don't ever do is I don't do message stories. I am not a fan of writing a story just because, oh, in this story, there's a man who, went and killed another man and he's really bad. That's not a story. That's something I hear on the news every day. That's not going to interest me. I want to read a story that's going to take me away to a different world. It's going to leave me with us. I want to read stories that make my mouth drop open. I want that sense of wonder intact. The greatest stories, I have thought about this a lot over the last decade. And I really have, E.M. Forster, who wrote A Passage to India, wrote a wonderful, one of the first critical books on the novel called, you should all read it, by the way, it's called Aspects of the Novel by E.M. Forster. Every reader, every person who's interested in writing should really read that book. And Forster, even a person of such high caliber who influenced people like Harold Bloom and Nobel Prize winners and Pulitzer winners, even Forster says a story that surprises the reader will often trump any other literary merit. So, because I think what happens is a story that surprises me suddenly makes me regress into childhood. If you can make me regress into childhood, you have bypassed my rational, dubious, cynical, conscious mind. You have immediately succeeded because I am left defenseless. I have no defenses anymore against the story. I'm going to respond to it in the most primal, most primitive way, and that it's only going to be on an emotional level at that particular time. So if a writer can do that, you can't do that with a message story. The moment you write a message story, you're activating my political reactions. You're not really connecting with me on a human emotional level. And so that's how I think of storytelling. So when I write a story, even if it's my story, Vaporization Enthalpy, by the way, just so you guys know, it was written for Neil Gaiman's week. Okay. It was written for Neil Gaiman's week at Clarion West when I was at Clarion with Neil. He was my teacher that week. and it was to, I wrote it for Neil Gaiman, and Gaiman read that story and he said, Usman, you have used a gimmick because there is a particular scientific structure, and he said you have used a gimmick. You didn't need it. The story is strong without it. And I completely ignored Neil. I said, okay, whatever. You have your opinion. I have my own opinions. And then my opinion was later vindicated when Samuel R. Delany, who's a legend in science fiction, a Paris Review interview, Chip read that story and it made him cry. Chip read that story and said, Usman, you made me cry. I want you to send this story to the Paris Review. It never got published in the Paris Review. But and Chip is a legend. He is a guy who writes books of criticism, one of the most respected writers in the world. But the story was written in a way, and I didn't do it consciously. I just wanted to write a good story, but it hit him on an emotional level. So he didn't even deal with it rationally. It's sort of, it was poorly written at that time. But once he cried, he forgave everything else. Hit the reader in a way that the reader is just left defenseless and you will always succeed.
Honestly, wow, like that is a concept that has quite baffled me. But at the same time, when I now reflect on some of the stories that I've read, like it comes off as such a strong aspect of it and like such a fascinating aspect of it as well. And like based on it, I would want my next question to be would be that the first question basically that I formulated after I finished the collection was like how jarring, how beautifully, I don't, and violence isn't beautiful, but how beautifully violent and fascinating these concepts, such grotesque concepts, like come across in the book. Like you would expect, it isn't like they aren't cliffhangers or they aren't like certain shifts, but at the same time, the story transforms in a way that it is quite jarring and hauntingly beautiful to you. uh, like it is sometimes there are instances of violence that can really captivate you as well, but like I know that sounds it that does come off a little different, but like once you start to read it, it really affects you in that way, in that strong way. So but my question would be that I still, what I really found was that and this is my analysis, it could just be wrong, but the fact that the stories are quite otherworldly and quite surreal in the way that they portray such intense and jarring emotions, but at the same time, they are quite real in a way that, and I find that that intensifies the impact that it had on me as a reader. Like there are stories, there is one story, I wouldn't really go into the details, but like it talks about such violent images at first that you can't really conjure it in your imagination, but at the same time it when by the time the story ends you're left feeling quite a real impact of it, and like you can think of it, and like in the back of my mind somewhere it does feel real and happening, even despite the fact that I know that it is speculative fiction and it is a story. So like it works different than a sci-fi story, it works different than a Star Trek concept story where aliens come from the other planets. So it works differently than that. There's this certain realism in it, I would put it. It might be a wrong way to put it, but like I really want your thoughts over this aspect of these stories, this real aspect and this intense human aspect of these stories.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. So, I grew up reading a lot of Urdu literature. I read a lot of realist literature in both English and in Urdu, specifically in Urdu. And I read a lot of Urdu poetry. And I guarantee you, if you've read a lot of Urdu poetry, it is going to seep into your English prose eventually. I'm a living example, and it helps. By gosh, it helps. Because it really, all of a sudden, the language usage for me, I personally believe I've been Amir Hussain Saab, who's a well-known short story writer. He um, remarked when he first read my stories that I don't care what genre you're writing, whatever you're doing, it's really well done. It's the language used is really musical and lyrical, and I think it's nothing. It's really not to do with English literature. It's more to do with Urdu literature. So If you read enough and in different languages, there is actually scientific evidence that your brain changes if you read in more than a couple languages. So I highly encourage everyone to explore different kinds of languages and different kinds of literatures because it will eventually help you. And this juxtaposition of the real and the SF, for me, a lot of Star Trek and Star Wars is not really, I mean, it's called science fiction, but if you think about it, they're all adventure stories dressed up with lasers. This is a description that Ted Chiang uses in one of his interviews. I mean, of course, it's from a fandom point of view, it's science fiction, but it's a bunch of people on a starship and their enemies attacking, and then there's these fancy lasers and these fancy firefights. You can see that in a Western as well. It's just a Western at the end of the day. It's people shooting at each other and people trying to run away with some funny characters thrown along the way. It's not really science fiction if you think about it in terms of what science fiction tries to do. Um, a lot of people think science fiction, and I was actually reading Frederick just before I talked to you guys. Someone on Twitter, a friend of mine, tweeted a quote of Frederick Pohl. He's a very well-known science fiction, one of the old masters of science fiction. And Pohl once said, "A good science fiction story does not predict the automobile; it predicts the traffic jam." You see, it does not predict the automobile, it predicts the traffic jam, the problems that come with technology, the problems that come when you're pushing the boundaries of rational knowledge or reason. So that is the kind of science fiction that I like. I like science fiction which is rooted in the real, because if you go by old SF, there is almost a vocabulary that you have to transcend. In fact, Samuel R. Delaney has a book about it. It's called The Jewel Hinged Jaw. It's a book of criticism on science fiction and the vocabulary of science fiction. So I find my comfortable home ground are these stories where I'm rooted in the real, but I take the real as a launch pad and then I go off. So, for example, The Wandering City. Wandering City was written on commission, basically. Arizona State University's Center for Science and Imagination. They were running a series called Us in Flux, and they asked me, "Hey, Usman, someone gave us your name. Would you be interested in writing a story for us?" And the pandemic had just hit. This story was written just 7 months ago. So the pandemic had just hit, and I was afraid that we were all going to lose our salaries and income, right? So what if we were out of job? So I said I made a decision. I'm not going to say no to any commission. Historically, I would just say no to a lot of them. So I said I'll do it because they were paying me really well. So and they said it's 3,000 words. This is your or 2,000 words. This is your limit. You give us a short story. And I had been thinking about this idea that what if in Pakistan, or especially in Pakistan, what if all of a sudden one day I woke up and there was this weird enchanted city right outside my house? How would I respond to it? What would I do? What would you do if there was an enchanted city floating around and it landed right next to your mohalla? Now, all of a sudden, Lahore has to deal with it. So, how does Imran Khan deal with that? How does the army deal with that? Because it's a geopolitical nuisance, right? So, what would be, and if a city like this was just landing randomly, there had to be a history to it. So, that's how the Wandering City came about. And I'm really amused when Noor at LLF, Noor Nasreen Ibrahim, who's a science fiction writer and a journalist, she said that she laughed loudly when she read the line where Imran Khan is addressing the audience and says, "Ghabrana nahi hai." And so Noor said, I just laughed out loud when I read that line because it seemed so real. It seemed like this is exactly what Imran Khan would do if an enchanted city landed. So that's what science fiction is supposed to do. It's supposed to deal with the real and the unreal, and the juxtaposition and the tug between the two. Each reality and unreality is pulling you toward itself. It's your job to navigate it, as well as you can.
Yeah, I really agree with this idea of juxtaposition and the way that SF is really less about descriptive and more about the impact. And that's a fascinating idea to think about and to reflect on, particularly in context of your stories. I would love to go on about the stories in itself. Like I could go on about each story for like hours, but due to the constraints of time, I'd like to now start to wrap up a bit. And I correct me if I'm wrong, but considering the timeline of when these stories were written, I understand that in the span of all of them, you've had a particularly but even in a general way, like you've always had a very particularly close relationship with the writing community for a long time, and I know how closely knit with the writing community in itself that you are. And then you also co-founded Salam Award, and this also serves as a really good push for young writers. Like it really serves as a really good binder in the community as well. So particularly for the writers, I'm sure we have budding writers here. I myself write. So like in context of that, I'd really want you to talk about first off talk about a little about the staying connected to the community and how that affects your work if it does in the first place. And secondly, if you could talk a little about the to the writers that we have potentially have here, and any advice potential advice that you might want to give.
Thank you for asking that question. When I was setting off, again, like I said, I have to answer through stories. That's my mode. When I was setting off, I had no guide. I had never attended a writing convention. I last studied creative writing when I was 15 years old. And I did my O levels. That was my last time I wrote an essay in English. And then I went to medical school. I'm a doctor. I went to Aga Khan. And in Aga Khan, for the first 2 years, I just read voraciously on my own. And it was very difficult to balance my love for literature and medicine at the same time. It's been a difficult. I went to AKU in 2000. It's been 20 years, and so it was not easy trying to balance the two lives because no one there was interested in this sort of literature, list of literary push. And I never thought that I would end up in the writing community at all. I really didn't. So I just read everything. I read Rumi in Farsi, whatever. And I remember walking in the quad and with T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock running through my head. I still know the first, I pretty much memorized the poem. I still remember the poem. And I would be dissecting or in the surgery, during a surgery, and these random bits of poetry would be going through my head. So I have I think that since I didn't have a guide, I really strongly wanted to be part of a writing community. And I really wish that Pakistan finally is, I'm happy Pakistan is maturing up to the point where we're beginning to have this writing community where people can come and talk to writers. And I know that Bilal Tanveer is leading the Young Writers Workshop at LUMS. And I believe Awais Khan is running the Writing Institute. So these things are very important. But what we don't have right now is we don't have a fan run writing convention. We need fan run writing cons that are not controlled by money, that are not controlled by big money, so to speak, where people are deciding who invite and whom not to. Because in America, science fiction really took off through these fandoms. So we need fandoms in Pakistan to come together, and I see it happening now. I'm seeing this happen. It has nothing to do with me, but I think that is happening. I do think the Salam Award has helped, though. I think the Salam Award has helped to bring about a budding group of science fiction writers who are all now publishing internationally. Kehkashan Khalid, Nihal Ijaz Khan, who's also a doctor. Noor Nasreen Ibrahim was a finalist twice for the Salam Award. So Noor is publishing, Kehkashan is publishing. We have Sania Kamal has published, Yusra Amjad has published. So people around this sort of science fictional community have really grown up. My advice to writers always, again, like I said, I really, in general, I'm in love with this idea, even if I'm not in love with life itself sometimes, I'm always in love with this idea of life and people coming together. That's just kind of how I'm built. I really think that young writers should come together. Right? Other writers are not your competition. They just aren't. So don't buy into that at all. They're not your competition. They're there to be admired. They're there to push you into healthy competition to become better writers yourself. I have so many times been filled with admiration for other people's work, like Kelly Link, like Nayyar Masood, like Mumtaz Mufti in the beginning when I was starting off, Ted Chiang, Kelly Robeson, so many, Alyssa Wong. Alyssa and I sort of came of age together, in, so to speak, in the writing community. So Isabel Yap, all these people, Karen Joy Fowler, who wrote the Jane Austen book club and is a Booker finalist as well. So all these people, they're there to goad you on, to support you, but really there are people to learn from, and learn from everyone. Read everything. Don't hop onto any bandwagons, even if it's problematic writers. Read them, you will learn from them. This is my opinion. Again, please take it with a grain of salt. I'm definitely not telling you all to listen to me without reservations. You should absolutely have reservations about what I tell you. And anyone who's telling you advice, giving you advice, um, I often say that it's dangerous to take advice. It's more dangerous to give it. So always take it with a grain of salt. You want to be your own person who's talked to different writers, read different writers, read different critics, read everything, and then you decide who you want to be, and then you write whatever you want to write. And if you get to that pro level, and you will, I am telling you, one of the reasons I'm so happy about the Islam Award is it brings people together. Then these writers start talking to each other. Then, for example, a lot of Islam finalists are now on a Discord server with other American, Pakistani writers and South Asian writers. So all day long, there is like jabbering with each other, right? So they know submission guidelines. A lot of people in Pakistan don't even know what the word submission guideline means. What does manuscript format mean? What is a cover letter? How do you write it? What's the synopsis? What's a premise? So how do you write an opening, a middle? How do you wrap up a story? What's this idea of the story behind the story? What is metaphor? How do you, all these craft things, they become second nature to you after a couple of years. The first 2 years are hard because you're raw, you're just starting out, and then all of a sudden that switch flicks on and you start selling professionally. It takes a couple of years, but most people can do it. For some people, it can be 10 years. I know writers who broke through after 10 years. But so the earlier you start and you decide who you want to be, please just don't think because I'm a spec fic writer, I'm here talking to you, you want to be a spec fic writer. No, you want to be a writer who you want to be. You want to maybe write literary fiction, mainstream fiction. Great, do it. Read everything. Write. Ray Bradbury used to write 1,000 words a day. Maybe you can do 500. Bradbury once challenged himself to write a story a week. And the famous quote goes, write a story a week. I challenge you to I challenge you to not produce a good story after 52 weeks. Write a story a week. It's impossible to write 52 bad stories in a row. So, the more you write, the more you play with it. And even when you're writing, you'll be reading other people. Read people. If you are interested in science fiction, I mean, I have a website where I have tons of free online stories. You're welcome to explore it. It's www.usmanmalik.org. If you go in the bibliography, I have tons of stories free to read online. And then other writers that you want to read. I love John Crowley. I love Isabel Yap. I love Alyssa Wong. My heroes are Kelly Link, Ted Chiang. I really like Junor Diaz's work. Carmen Maria Machado. Who else these days? So I'm usually all over the. I'm reading everything that I can read. I love reading a lot of nonfiction. Read a lot of nonfiction for weird ideas. I recently wrote a story called Challava. It's going to be in an anthology edited by the writer of Bird Box. The guy who wrote the movie Bird Box, Josh Malerman. So Malerman is writing the introduction. So I wrote the story Challava in 12 days because I was on a deadline. It was so damn stressful to write it in 12 days. And the story is called Challava. So I wanted to do a good job of it. And I started researching the Challava. And I came upon this ancient Indian rite that I bet you no one has heard of. It's called the Challava ritual. And the Challava ritual is when there is vaba or plague in a small town in India, especially in Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh. These Indian villagers would make the entire village touch a coconut and then hang the coconut around the goat's horns. And then the goat would be taken by a chokidar to the next village. The next village would not allow the goat to enter the village, but instead the next village's chokidar would take the goat and take it on, and so on. And the goat would keep traveling till the goat died. This was called the ritual of Challava. Because remember, Challava is a creature that moves really fast. It's a mercurial thing. It's also a fickle lover, right? छलावा लड़का छलावा की तरह है. So it's a fickle lover. So those two, three things came together, and I wrote the story. And that story is now going to be an anthology with Tor slash Macmillan. So be hungry, steal with elegance, steal from everywhere you can. You know, read these weird things because that's how you get ideas for weird stories. And I like reading and writing stories that are memorable. I hope that my stories will be memorable because once you read them, you're like, it's not a story that you can. I hope that you can't forget it easily. And well, time will tell, right? But that's my hope at least.
I'm certain they will be memorable. At least they were for me, I'm sure, and they have been for the past 5 or 6 years now. Like, but thank you, Usman. We don't have much time left. I just want to thank you for sharing all these stories and sharing all these advice, and at the same time sharing all these uh, this much valued insight of your craft. It was certainly a pleasure to have you here, and I definitely want to see you holding a workshop here at LUMS sometime in the future as well. I really look forward to it, and yeah, it was wonderful having you. Hope to have you soon as well. It was certainly a pleasure.
Thank you, Zen. Thank you guys for being here. It's an absolute pleasure. And again, read everything. Don't hold back. Don't be misled by people who are snobbish about things. Sometimes you learn more from reading bad stuff because it will tell you that you're pretty good. That's a nice ego booster, anyways. All right. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye bye.
Take
Assalamu
care.
alaikum.